to Staff Works Explained. If you are here for the first time, please consider subscribing to this channel. You can also watch other videos that you have done on different topics. In this video, we are talking about the Nairobi-Nakuru Mau Summit Highway. We'll look at what is inside the new public partnership deal, the Treasury's defense and why it's coming now, and also look at the questions that still need answers, including whether this road was started without an agreement. The Nairobi-Nakuru Mau Summit Highway has never been just another road or project. It is Kenya's busiest transport corridor, the backbone of trade, linking the port of Mombasa to the Western Kenya and the wider East African region, as well as one of the country's most anticipated infrastructure upgrades. Yet, more than the engineering challenge, it is the project financing and procurement journey that has become the center of national debate. In recent days, the National Treasury sought to reshape the conversation. In a statement issued on 9th July 2026, the Treasury defended the current public-private partnership PPP model, arguing that the government has restructured the project to eliminate an annual Kenya shillings 23 billion availability payment and transfer revenue risk to the private sector. The message was straightforward. Taxpayers will no longer be required to shoulder the financial burden as it was in the original contract. The statement has been welcomed by some as evidence of prudent fiscal management. Others, however, have questions whether it tells the entire story. Here, we examine what changed between the original French-led concession and the current PPP model, why the Treasurer felt compelled to issue the statement, whether the construction began before the main concession was concluded, and what this development revealed about Kenya's evolving approach to financing major infrastructure projects. Here we have two projects, but one highway. Understanding the Treasury statements requires going back to the beginning. In October 2020, the government signed a concession agreement with Rift Valley Connect Consortium, which was led by French infrastructure investors Vinci Highways and Meridian Company. Under that arrangement, the consortium would finance, upgrade, operate, and maintain the Nairobi-Nakuru Mau Summit Highway through a long-term public-private partnership arrangement. The financial model was adopted. It is known as an availability payment PPP. Although the terminology sounds technical, the principle is relatively simple. Instead of relying entirely on toll collections, the government commits to making annual payments to private investor, provided the road is available and maintained to agreed performance standards. Whether traffic is high or low becomes largely the government's financial responsibility. So that's what availability payment PPP model entails. For investors, such models reduce commercial uncertainty because income is largely guaranteed. For governments, however, they create long-term financial obligations that must be honored regardless of changing economic conditions. According to the National Treasury, that management would eventually have required annual payment of approximately 23 billion Kenya shillings, while cumulative fiscal obligations over the first 15 years could have approached 200 billion Kenya shillings once inflation and foreign exchange adjustment were factored in. These figures would later become the centerpiece of Treasury's defense of the new arrangement. Let's now a changing economic landscape. Between the signing of the original concession and today, Kenya's economic environment changed considerably. Like many countries, Kenya faced the after effects of COVID-19 pandemic, elevated global inflation, higher interest rates, and a weakening shillings, as well as increasing constraint on public finances. According to the Treasury, those developments fundamentally altered the affordability of original PPP model. From a project finance perspective, this argument has merit. Infrastructure projects extending over 3 decades are built on financial assumptions about inflation, exchange rates, borrowing costs, as well as economic growth. When those assumptions change significantly, governments often revisit commercial arrangements before projects advance too far. Treasury argues that this is precisely what happened. Rather than continuing with arrangements that guaranteed annual payment, the government opted to redesign the project around a different principle. Users, not taxpayers, would become the primary source of revenue. Now let's look at what exactly changed. The current project follows what is commonly described as user pay toll PPP. Unlike the previous arrangement, investors recover their capital primarily through toll revenue, which is collected for motorists using the highway. That seemingly simple adjustment changes the allocation of financial risk. Imagine a newly built toll road expected to carry 50,000 vehicles every day. If only 30,000 motorists use it, somebody absorbs that shortfall. In the previous model, according to Treasury explanation, much of that risk rested with government through guaranteed availability payments. In the revised structure, Treasury says that commercial risk has largely shifted to the private concessionaire. For public finances, that represents a significant difference. For motorists, however, it introduces another reality. The financial success of projects now depends heavily on motorists willing to pay the tolls. Now, why did the Treasury issue that statement now? The timing of Treasury's statement is perhaps as significant as its content. Public debate surrounding the project has intensified following disclosure relating to toll charges, concession terms, as well as implementation model. Against that backdrop, Treasury appears to have sought to reassure the taxpayers and investors. To taxpayers, the message was that government has avoided a substantial long-term fiscal burden. To investors as well as lenders, the statement signaled continued government support for the revised commercial model. There is also another possible explanation. Large PPPs projects rely heavily on public confidence. Questions surrounding affordability, procurement, and commercial viability can affect investor sentiment as much as engineering process. Seen from this perspective, the Treasury statement reads not simply as a financial explanation but also as a strategic communication which is intended to strengthen confidence in the project or to cool the temperatures. Another question that arises from this statement is, was the project restructured or repriced? Perhaps the most interesting aspect of the Treasury statement is the language that has been used. The government says the project was restructured. From a project management perspective, that description invites closer examination. The original concession involved one consortium. The current project involves a different concessionaire, different commercial arrangements, as well as a different method of allocating financial risk. Observers could reasonably argue that what occurred goes beyond restructuring. It is same as termination of one PPP model followed by procurement of another. That decision may appear academic, but it matters. In project governance, restructuring usually implies modifying an existing agreement while preserving its underlying commercial framework. Replacing one concession with another under substantially different terms is a more fundamental transition. Treasury understandably focuses on the economic outcome. Legal scholars and procurement specialists may be more interested in the contractual journey that produced it, and that's where most people are. Now, the question of the contract. One issue has generated considerable public discussion. Did construction begin before the main concession agreement had been signed? Available information from Kenya National Highway Authority says that preliminary activities started under what is known as early works agreement. Such agreements are not unusual in major infrastructure programs. They allow limited activities such as surveys, geotechnical investigation, utility location, traffic management planning, and site mobilization to start, while partners or parties finalize the broader concession as well as satisfy remaining contractual conditions. An early works agreement in itself is a legally binding contract. It is, however, different from long-term project agreement governing the financing, construction, operation, as well as maintenance of the highway over the several decades. What remains less clear is the exact timeline separating the two milestones. Kenya National Highway Authority has publicly confirmed that the project agreement was ultimately executed and has published the statutory disclosure required under the Kenya PPP framework. However, the precise date on which the final agreement was signed has not been prominently disclosed in publicly available documents. For many observers, that missing piece of chronology has fueled unnecessary speculation. It does not necessarily mean or suggest that things were not done right, but in projects involving billions of shillings and decades of long concessions, transparency is often as valuable as the contracts themselves. So, has the government truly transferred the risk? That's another question that we can ask, was being asked. Treasury's central claim is that revenue risk has moved to the private sector. Commercially, that appears accurate. If traffic volumes fail to meet expectations, investors now have greater exposure than they would have, when you consider the previous availability payment model. However, project finance is rarely that straightforward. Governments remain responsible for land acquisition, regulatory approvals, policy stability, and maintaining an environment in which projects can operate successfully. If unforeseen events significantly affect traffic or project economics, history shows that concessions agreements are often renegotiated rather than abandoned. According to the world, around the world, many PPP projects have gone through amendments after financial close because actual operating conditions differed from the original forecast. Transferring risk, therefore, does not necessarily eliminate government involvement. It changes where the first layer of commercial responsibility sits. Let's look at this by drawing lessons beyond one highway. The Nakuru Summit project offers lessons which can extend far beyond road construction. It demonstrates that the importance of regularly testing financial assumptions throughout the life of major infrastructure projects. It highlights the growing preference for PPP structures that reduce direct fiscal exposure. But it also illustrates why transparency matters at every stage, from procurement, contract execution to implementation and public communication. Infrastructure projects are ultimately judged not by the kilometers that have been built, but also by the confidence they inspire among citizens, investors, as well as future partners. In conclusion, the Treasury statement was not merely an explanation of one highway project. It was a defense of a broader philosophy of infrastructure financing. Its argument is that Kenya has moved from a model in which taxpayers guaranteed investors' return to one in which investors assume greater responsibility commercially, while users pay for the service they receive, and that also brings another controversy. Whether that objective is fully realized will only become clear once the highway is operational and actual traffic volumes begin to test the assumptions underlying the concession. What is already evident is that Nairobi-Nakuru Mau Summit Highway has become more than a transport corridor project. That, for that matter, it has evolved into a case study in how governments balance fiscal sustainability, private investment, and public accountability. The road itself will eventually connect towns and cities. The decision taken along the way may prove just as important, shaping how Kenya finances major infrastructure for decades to come. And perhaps the only unanswered question that still deserves a clear public answer is not whether the project will be built. It is already happening. But whether the full contractual journey from the original French-led concession to today's PPP model will one day be documented with the same clarity as the engineering drawings that will ultimately deliver the road. So thank you for reaching this far. If it's your first time here, please consider subscribing to this channel. You can also watch other videos that you have made on this project and others. So thank you, and let's meet in the next one.